doctor on night duty hears a whisper of, "No, please," just as he is about to pull the plug on a 6-year-old girl. And from that moment on, everything changes. Stay with us until the end and be part of this story. The early morning was freezing. The hallway of the Children's Hospital in Querétaro creaked under the footsteps of Dr. Leonardo Barragan. He buttoned his coat up to his neck as if to protect himself from the invisible wind that entered through the cracks in the doors and windows. The clock read 12:07 a.m. Few patients, little movement, just routine at his fingertips. Leonardo leafed through files, something he had been doing for years. He turned on the dim light, drank his cold coffee, and entered the data in the heavy silence of the night shift. Then he saw the name Isabel Reyes, 6 years old, in a deep coma for 3 months. Domestic accident, the paper said. There weren't many words there, just confidentiality. An empty chair next to the girl's bed. No visitors, no flowers. As if she were isolated in a world of her own. Leonardo took a deep breath and climbed the stairs to room 314. The door opened with a soft click. The fluorescent lights revealed the immaculate white walls. The tone of white felt heavy at that moment. The air smelled of disinfectant, of machines working, of suspended life. He entered and felt the hard floor under his shoes. There she was, small and motionless, her skin pale, almost transparent, covered by sheets. Her head turned to one side, with fine threads searching for a light that did not come. The monitors beeped slowly, a mechanical sound with a rhythm that seemed to remember. She was still alive. She felt so fragile. Leonardo looked at the oxygen tubes, nutrition, electrodes, everything there, holding a sigh, perhaps just a sigh, a very fine thread between the end and what might come next. He approached the empty chair that belonged to a father or mother. She was alone, as always. He sat down, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't usually admit to feeling fear, but now he accepted it silently. I don't know if she's coming back. She touched the file and read it again. No visitors, no flowers, no one. It was as if the world had already given up on her, and she felt guilt. Whose fault was it? The hospital's? Life's? Maybe everyone's? Leonardo closed his eyes for a second. The white lights reminded him of how many children had come before, how many families had cried, and there, that night, he felt something different, an urgency. He thought of Isabel, 6 years old, perhaps the age to play, to run, to smile, and there she was, motionless. He whispered softly, "Isabel, I'm here." Silence responded, nothing but the sound of the machine, but also something else, a presence. He opened his eyes quickly, hoping to see a reaction. Nothing. The monitor continued to beep. The reflection of the light cast a shadow on his tired face. He stayed a little longer. He looked at the ceiling and saw the fan turning slowly. The sound was soft, softer than the beeping of the machine. The cold seemed concentrated in that room. The steel table where the instruments were kept glowed faintly under the light. And Leonardo thought, today is not going to be just any day, because he felt that this long, drawn-out moment had a weight that he had not noticed before. When he got up to leave, he hesitated and looked at little Isabel once more. She was delicate and still, but she was there, and even though the tubes were breathing for her, the simple act of being there, the human presence, already seemed important. He buttoned his gown once more, leaned against the door, and let out a sigh. The door closed softly behind him. He returned to the hallway, still cold, still dark. The bell in the director's office rang softly. Leonardo already knew when they rang with that tone. It was not good news. When he entered, he found the hospital director sitting with his glasses on the tip of his nose, surrounded by papers. The room was silent, only the ticking of an old clock filling the space. The man did not look up immediately, only nodding toward a piece of paper on the table. "It just arrived," Leonardo said in a dry tone. "It's about the girl in a coma, Isabel Reyes." Leonardo frowned. There had been some change. The director sighed, ran his hand across his forehead, and looked at him directly. No change. Her father signed the release to disconnect her. Silence. 1 second, then 2. The world seemed to stop right there. Leonardo blinked slowly, not sure if he had heard correctly. Disconnect her, the director repeated, pushing the paper closer to him. He said he can't pay anymore, that the girl isn't coming back. Everything is legally signed. It can be done now, and you know. No, she hasn't shown any improvement since she got here, and according to the test, she can now be declared brain dead. Leonardo stared at the paper, but couldn't read anything. His eyes were blurry. His heart skipped a beat. It was strange, as if something inside him had tightened. But then she started, then stopped, and tried again. She's only 6 years old. The director just nodded slightly. I know. Leonardo ran his hand through his hair. The air felt heavier. The sound of the clock now beating loudly like a hammer. He took a deep breath. It's for today. Now it's possible. The doctor didn't respond. He just took the paper. His hands were shaking. It was just a sheet of paper, but it seemed to weigh as much as a stone. As he left the room, the hallway seemed darker. The walk to the room was slow. Each step brought back memories he didn't want to have. The looks on the children's faces. Mothers praying. Nights spent holding small hands that were struggling to stay. When he reached the room, the door was open. He pushed it, slowly. The sound of the monitor was still there. Constant, insistent. The room was cold. The white light from the ceiling made Isabel's skin look like wax. Small, very small. Leonardo approached, swallowing hard. He took the paper out of his pocket. It was like a sentence. He stood there for an immeasurable amount of time. The sound of the monitor was the only thing that could be heard. He placed the paper on the steel table and ran his hand over his forehead. He approached the equipment and reached out his hand, but he didn't have the courage to touch her. He just stared at the girl, her face serene, almost peaceful, as if she were sleeping in a world without pain. I'm sorry, little one, he whispered, his voice breaking inside. A tear escaped. He didn't know if it was anger, sadness, or helplessness, perhaps all of them together, because it didn't feel fair. But there he was, with the order and the loneliness of that girl, and the silence screaming louder than any alarm. Leonardo's hand trembled as he approached the oxygen tube. He knew what he was about to do. He had done it before in other situations with other patients, but never like this. Never with such a small, quiet, lonely girl. The sound of the heart monitor continued its slow, regular rhythm, almost as if it were also waiting. The room was filled with a heavy silence, as if everything there, the walls, the furniture, the very air, knew what was about to happen. He stretched out his arm, touched the tube carefully, and pulled it out. Just that, a simple gesture. But in that very second, just as he removed the tube, the sound came, a soft, faint whisper, but clear. No, please. Leonardo froze. He felt a chill run down his spine. His hand remained suspended in the air. His heart began to beat faster, uncontrollably. He opened his eyes wide and looked around. Nothing. No one. Who's there? He whispered, almost without a voice. Silence. The same silence as before, but now that silence felt different. He took 2 steps back, leaned against the wall, and breathed rapidly, trying to find a logical explanation. It could have been his imagination, the sound of some device, fatigue, but that voice sounded so real, and he had heard it clearly. No, please. He felt his stomach churn and left the room quickly. His footsteps echoed on the cold floor. He went straight to the nursing station. A blonde nurse with her hair pulled back in a bun was drinking coffee from a blue mug. Marina, did you hear something a little while ago? He asked agitatedly. She looked at him, frightened. What do you mean? A girl's voice coming from room 13, 14, as if she were talking in her sleep. She frowned and took a step forward. No, doctor. I've been here for a while. I didn't hear anything. Leonardo. He shook his head slowly, trying to understand, but unable to. He felt very clearly that it was not a dream or his imagination. That voice asked with fear, with pain. He returned to the room with uncertain steps, pushed the door open carefully, and then stopped. Isabel was still the same, but she was not the same. Her eyes were half open, not completely, just a slit, as if fighting against a very deep sleep, and something else in the corner of her eye. A single tear falling, slow, silent. Leonardo felt something inside him break. Isabel, he whispered without realizing he had said it. The monitor continued at the same pace, but he was no longer listening to that. What he heard now was his own heart, fast, strong, alive. He approached her slowly, knelt beside the bed. "If it was you who spoke to me," he said, almost without a voice, "then I promise I will listen to you." And he stayed there, holding the hand of a girl who, until 2 minutes ago, the whole world had given up for lost. But now, something had changed, and he knew it. He wasn't crazy. He had heard it. He had seen it, and that couldn't be ignored. The sun was just rising. The city was still slowly waking up, but he was already dressed in his robe, his eyes sunken, his head full of thoughts that had kept him awake the night before. He couldn't close his eyes. He relived the sound of that voice, the tear on the girl's face. Something inside him said, "Go back there. Look at her again. Don't ignore that." The hallway was still empty, the cold lights flickering on the ceiling. Each step to the room seemed longer than the last. When he reached the door, he took a deep breath, stood still for a moment with his hand on the doorknob, and entered. The room was the same cold silence, but now it was no longer just another place. That room had weight. It had meaning. Inside, there was a question that no one dared to ask. And yes, she is listening. Leonardo approached slowly and sat down in the chair next to her, his eyes fixed on the monitor. Everything was the same, but he didn't want to look at the machines. He wanted to see her, Isabel, so small, so quiet. He reached out and took her hand. It was light, almost without warmth, and then he spoke softly in a hoarse voice, as if he didn't want to break the delicacy of the moment. "If you're there, squeeze my finger." He waited. The silence seemed to mock his hope. No reaction. Her hand remained limp, without strength. "Come on, my girl," he whispered. "Just a little bit. Show me you're here." More silence. He looked at the ceiling and took a deep breath. He was about to let go of her hand, to give up, when he felt it. A slight squeeze. Almost nothing, but it was there. He froze. Isabel's voice came out low and broken. He knew he had felt it. It was real. Leonardo's eyes filled with tears. She brought her other hand to her face, trying to hold back, but she couldn't. She began to cry right there, but he knew he had felt it. It was real. She squeezed her eyes shut. Leonardo's eyes filled with tears. He brought his other hand to his face, trying to hold back, but he couldn't. He began to cry right there, alone in the cold chair next to a girl whom the whole world had forgotten. He cried for her, for what she had been through, for the loneliness of that room, for the strength she had to squeeze, for not giving up. He stayed there for hours without saying anything, just looking at her, holding her hand as if it were the last thing that made sense in that place. When the clock struck 9 in the morning, they called him to the office. He looked the director in the eye and said without blinking. She responded. She had a neurological response. She moved her fingers. I'm sure she spoke in her sleep after I removed the tubes. It was a lie. The medicine might not count that squeeze as a response, but for him it was a cry in the midst of silence. The director took note, nodded, and Leonardo left with his heart pounding. That night, he didn't go home. He took a blanket and an old pillow from the break room and stayed there next to Isabel. He pulled up a chair, settled down next to the bed, and began to talk. He talked about the sky, the heat that was already coming, the horrible hospital coffee. He said his team had lost again, as usual, and laughed, alone, and then he fell silent. Hours passed. He read a book aloud, a silly children's story. He would stop from time to time and look at her. Sometimes he swore he saw a tremor in her eyelids. Sometimes nothing, but he didn't leave. In the middle of the night he spoke softly. "You know, when you squeezed my finger, I felt something. That you're there, that you can hear me. So I'm going to keep talking every day until you answer me again, even if it's with another squeeze. I'll wait." And so he remained, like someone making a promise without words, an oath between two worlds, between pain and hope. The day was slowly disappearing as the sky outside began to change color. A shade of blue crept through the window glass, but inside the room, the world remained still, motionless, suspended between machines and waiting. Leonardo was there once again. It was already routine. He slept little and ate even less. The time he had was hers, for her, because after that small, almost invisible squeeze, he couldn't get any further away. Sitting in the same chair, covered with a thin jacket, he had his notebook open on his legs. He wrote down details, small changes, things that perhaps no one would notice. A slight movement of the forehead, a blink, a deeper sigh. But for him, each of those signs was a cry, proof that Isabel was still trying to come back. That morning, the room was quieter. The sound of the monitor no longer bothered him so much. It was almost part of him now, and she, as always, seemed to be sleeping. Leonardo held her hand as he did every day, running his thumb slowly over her fingers as if to say, "I'm here." It was then that he felt it. It wasn't the touch. It was the faint voice, almost a thought spoken silently. The cabin, the chains. Mom didn't scream. Leonardo froze. His heart stopped for a second, then began to beat strong again and again and again. He looked directly into her face. Isabel said, almost without a voice. She didn't repeat it, but her lips were still moving a little, and her eyes, although closed, were trembling under her eyelids. Leonardo took the pen out of his pocket with a trembling hand and wrote every word in the notebook. The cabin, the chains. Mom didn't scream. He read it silently and repeated it in a low voice, just for himself. Cabin, chains. Mom didn't scream. He felt a lump in his throat. The air became heavy. He looked at Isabel again. Her face was still serene, but now, after those words, she no longer seemed so peaceful. What did they do to you? Chain's mom didn't scream. He felt a lump in his throat. The air became heavy. He looked at Isabel again. Her face was still serene, but now, after those words, she no longer seemed so peaceful. What did they do to you, my girl? He whispered. The words kept spinning around in his head. Chains, cabin, silence. A 6-year-old girl with no visitors, no flowers, in a coma for 3 months saying things like that. It wasn't imagination. It was a silent scream. It was hidden pain. Leonardo rested his forehead on the edge of the bed. He stayed there in silence, his chest rising and falling slowly, the notebook trembling in his hands. He understood in that moment that this was not just a coma, not just an accident. There was something there, something big and dark. And even though she was so weak, she was trying to tell him. At the end of that same day, after writing down every word Isabel had whispered, Leonardo stood in front of the computer in the nursing station, his hands resting on the table, his face tired, his eyes fixed on the screen. He took a deep breath and opened the hospital system. He wanted to understand more. He needed to. That phrase wouldn't leave his head. Chains, cabin, mom didn't scream. That said more than any test. He typed in her full name, Isabel Reyes. The current file appeared first. The coma, the reports, the procedures, the father's request. No trace of the mother. But he went further. He clicked on the history section. He scanned it slowly, line by line. She wanted to find something that would explain, or at least point to some hidden truth. And then she found it. Date, 3 years ago. Emergency admission, various injuries, scrapes, bruises, minor rib fracture. Diagnosis, accidental fall. Notes from the service, frightened girl, not speaking. Accompanied by Gustavo Reyes, father. Leonardo remained motionless. He read it again and again. His breathing became heavy. Other records appeared. A year later, another entry. Pain in the arm and leg, fall again. Then constant fevers, repeated infections. Always him with her. Only him. Never a mother. Never another name. He turned off the monitor and leaned back in his chair, his chest feeling tight, suffocated. Something had been wrong for a long time, and no one saw it. Or worse, someone saw it and pretended nothing was wrong. He looked toward the door to her room. It was closed, but the image of the girl lying there with tubes with that whisper trapped on her lips came strongly to mind. The decision came as an impulse, but it wasn't madness. It was a cry from within. I'm not going to let this girl die without knowing what happened to her. He said it out loud to himself like a promise, as if he needed to get it out because now he knew. If everything depended on the reports and the bureaucratic forms, Isabel was doomed. It was only a matter of time. No one was going to get involved. No one wanted her to wake up. but he did, so he started searching. He opened the cabinet with the physical files and looked for folders, names of former doctors, visit records. Few, almost none. There was no mother's name, no phone number other than the father's. Everything pointed to a life surrounded by silence. A girl who had gone through things that no one wanted to see, and now there, among tubes and machines, she was trying to tell her story with what little strength she had left. Leonardo was not an investigator or a police officer. He was just a doctor. But now that girl's life was in his hands, and he felt deep in his soul that this was not just a clinical case. It was a cry for help, and whoever had done this to her definitely did not want her to wake up. The road was narrow, full of curves and loose stones. The GPS on his cell phone had stopped working almost half an hour ago, but Leonardo continued driving, guided by a crumpled piece of paper with the name "A Place" written by hand. Santa Teresa. The sky was cloudy, the air was dry but cold. In the distance, the mountains rose like gray walls, and between them, the small town appeared, shy, almost hidden, a place that seemed forgotten by time. Mud houses, few people in the streets, and a strange silence. It was not the normal silence of a small town. It was an uncomfortable silence that stared back at you. Leonardo stopped the car in the main square, slowly. Some children were playing in the distance, but they ran as soon as they saw him. A man sitting in front of a bar turned his face. No one smiled. No one spoke. He walked up to a woman who was sweeping in front of her house. White hair, slow steps. He approached her carefully. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, trying to be friendly. "I'm looking for information about a place. The cabin." She stopped sweeping and stood still, looking at him for a long, heavy second. "Cabin," he repeated, then more quietly, almost in a whisper. "The devil's cabin." Leonardo felt his body tense. "I don't know if it's that one, but it's where Gustavo Reyes lived." The woman let go of the broom, crossed herself, and pointed to the top of the hill, above the hill, after the last gate. "There. But don't go up there. Nobody goes up there." He thanked her, although he didn't know why. He got back in the car and continued along the dirt road. The path narrow, the tall grass hitting the windows. The higher he climbed, the more he felt the isolation, until he saw it. An old red house with a crooked roof, surrounded by dry trees, with no neighbors, no sound, only the wind. He stopped the car and got out with his heart in his throat. The door was ajar. He pushed it slowly. "Hello?" he called. Nothing, only the creaking of the wood. He went inside. The smell was strong, dampness, dust, something rotten. The wooden floor creaked with every step in the living room. Old furniture covered with sheets. In the kitchen, dirty dishes, some broken. But it was in the back room where he stopped. The floor there was cold cement. The walls were stained. In one corner, an old broken mattress. Next to it, rusty chains attached to the wall, broken toys scattered around, and what looked like a handprint made with something dark. Leonardo covered his mouth and swallowed saliva, and breathed slowly, trying to maintain control. He looked around at the wall. Small scratches made with a fingernail or something sharp. Dates. Many of them crossed out, others recent. It was like a desperate calendar. Someone was counting the days in there. And then he saw it in the corner next to the mattress, a dirty doll with eyes sewn shut with black thread. He picked it up carefully. It was light and crooked, but it had something inside, something hard. He opened the seam slowly, and a piece of paper fell out of the doll. "Dad says I shouldn't look." Leonardo read it once, twice, 3 times. The words trembled in his hand. The room spun for a moment. His stomach turned. His head hurt. This wasn't a house. It was a prison, a place of pain and fear. He looked around once more and felt it. The silence there wasn't normal. It was heavy, alive, as if everything in that place was still screaming, even without sound. He left the house slowly, breathing deeply, with the doll in his hand, and a certainty in his heart. Isabel had lived through hell, and yet she was still fighting to return. Leonardo was already on his way back to the car when he heard slow footsteps behind him, stepping on the dry earth. He turned around quickly, his heart still racing from everything he had seen inside that house. An elderly, thin, blind man walked with the help of a cane made from a branch. He had a wrinkled face, sunken eyes, and skin weathered by time. He stopped about 3 meters away and stared at Leonardo. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked in a hoarse voice with a strong accent. Leonardo just shook his head. He didn't have the breath or the courage to pretend he was there for another reason. The old man looked at the cabin behind him and sighed. "That place should have been burned down a long time ago." Leonardo took a step forward, still holding the wrist in his hands. "Did you know the person who lived here?" The old man looked him straight in the eye. He didn't answer right away, then spoke as if he had been holding it in for years. "He brought girls here. He said they were his nieces, but there were never any mothers, just him and the girls, and they were always different, always young." Leonardo felt a chill run through his body. He saw Isabel. The old man frowned. He thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. One of them was quieter than the others. She would stare out the window. She never spoke, but you could tell she was afraid. Afraid of everything. He paused, looked at the ground for a moment, then continued in a lower voice. "Sometimes we would hear screams in the night. A girl's screams and then silence. There was always a strange, strong smell of blood, or something dead." Leonardo had to lean on the cart. His hand was shaking, the other gripping the steering wheel tightly, as if that could hold up the world that was beginning to fall apart. "Why didn't anyone do anything?" he asked, unable to hide the anger in his voice. The old man sighed deeply and looked up at the sky. "Because fear rules here, and it pays well. For some, it was better to pretend they didn't see anything." Silence. Leonardo looked at the house again, the red paint peeling, the broken windows, the heavy air around it all. Now it seemed more alive, more cruel. The old man took a step back. "But you shouldn't be here. Anyone who messes with that ends up hurt." He wasn't just any man. Leonardo didn't answer. He just got into the car with his stomach churning and his head spinning as he drove back. The doll remained in the seat next to him, seeming to look at him with those sewn-on eyes, and every word the old man had said over and over in his mind. It was bigger, and much dirtier than he could have imagined. The hospital felt colder that day. The lights were the same, the hallways the same, but there was something in the air, a tension that Leonardo felt throughout his body from the moment he walked through the front door. He had returned from Santa Teresa with a broken soul. The images of the cabin, the old man's words, the paper inside the doll, everything kept spinning around in his head. He had to do something. He had to protect Isabel. She was alone, and now he knew too much to stay silent. He went straight to the elevator, but before he could press the button, he heard a voice behind him. "Dr. Leonardo." His body stiffened instantly. He turned around slowly. There, in the reception area, standing as if nothing had happened, was Gustavo Reyes, the man who claimed to be her father, the man who, according to the records, had been with Isabel during previous hospitalizations, the same name on the form authorizing the removal of life support. Leonardo stared at him. The man smiled a cold, lifeless, soulless smile. "I just came to see how my daughter is doing," he said in a low, drawling voice, "before her suffering ends." Leonardo didn't respond, but his heart was beating very fast. Gustavo's gaze was strange. It didn't seem like that of a father. It was that of someone who knew more than he was saying, someone who was waiting for the end, not for a cure. The man took 2 steps, adjusted his jacket on his shoulder, and said, "It's taking longer than it should." Then he turned and left, just like that. Leonardo stood still in silence, trying to understand. His hands were shaking. This visit was not normal. It was not a routine checkup. It was a warning, a message, a threat. He wasted no time. He got in his car and went straight to the nearest police station. When he arrived, he asked to speak to the officer on duty. He waited almost an hour until they called him. He entered the office tired but firm, took the folder out of his backpack, opened it, showed the photos, the cabin, the chains, the toys, handed over the paper he found inside the doll, told everything the neighbor told him, talked about the girl's history, every sign, every silence, every unexplained injury. The officer listened, frowned several times, grabbed the paper, looked at it from one side and then the other, sighed and said, Look, doctor, I understand your concern, but this is not direct evidence. Leonardo blinked slowly, trying to understand what he was hearing. It's not evidence? He asked. It's not a strong clue, yes, but to arrest someone we need more. A confession, a witness, something that connects him directly to a crime. A doll with a piece of paper isn't enough. An old house isn't enough either. Leonardo felt his stomach sink. He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Meanwhile, he's walking free, and she's lying there connected to tubes, fighting for her life. And you want to wait longer?" The officer looked away, ran his hand over his forehead, and said, "I'm very sorry, but for now, there's nothing we can do." Leonardo stood up, grabbed the folder tightly, said nothing more, left the office, crossed the street, opened the front door, and paused for a moment on the sidewalk. The sun was already beginning to set, and the evening light hit his face, but it didn't warm him. At that moment, he understood. He was alone. The early morning was heavy, one of those nights when even the sound of the clock is louder. The hospital was asleep, but Leonardo was not. Since his encounter with Gustavo, he could hardly even blink. He paced back and forth in the hallway with cold coffee in his hands, his heart racing. He could clearly feel that something bad was about to happen. At around 3 in the morning, he went to Isabel's room and pushed the door open slowly, careful not to wake the nurses on duty. The room was in darkness, only the green light of the monitor flashing slowly. Isabel was sleeping as usual, but the air felt different, heavy. Leonardo adjusted the sheet, checked the cables, the oxygen, the numbers on the screen. Everything was in order. He ran his hand through the girl's hair and whispered, "Hang in there, little one. It's almost over." He left quietly and went to get another coffee. It was only 10 minutes. 10 minutes of absence. When he returned to the hallway, he heard screams, the sound of metal falling, and a desperate voice. "Doctor, Doctor, Leonardo, quick!" It was Marina, the nurse on duty, running with trembling hands and a pale face. Leonardo dropped the glass and ran toward the room. When he entered, the world seemed to stop. The monitor beeped loudly and chaotically. The sound of her heartbeat was barely audible. The oxygen tube was disconnected. Isabel was motionless, her face paler than before. "My God!" Marina was crying. Someone moved everything. Leonardo didn't think. He grabbed the tube, reconnected it, adjusted the flow, and massaged the girl's chest. "Come on, Isabel. Breathe, please," he said through clenched teeth. Cold. Every second was an eternity. The monitor remained almost silent until suddenly a faint beep, then another and another. Leonardo closed his eyes and took a deep breath. She was coming back by a hair's breadth, but she was alive. "She's breathing," whispered Marina, crying. Leonardo said nothing. His hands were still shaking. His whole body ached. He looked around. No sign that the door had been forced open. No camera in the hallway. Nothing. But someone had been there and knew exactly what to do. Marina tried to say something, but he just raised his hand. "Don't say anything. Lock that door, and don't tell anyone." She obeyed. Leonardo stayed alone in the room, looking at the girl and feeling his heart burn. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a mistake. It was an attack. Someone wanted to kill her. The next morning, he went to the maintenance room and grabbed a small security camera, the kind used in elevators. He fixed it, modified it, and placed it behind the vase in a corner of the room from where he could see the entire bed. He didn't tell anyone. The day passed slowly. The hospital routine continued as normal, but inside him, nothing was normal. Every nurse who passed by, every door noise, every shadow in the hallway made his heart race. When dawn came, he stayed awake again, watching. Hours later, tired, he went to the monitor room to check the recordings. The video started normally, nurses entering and leaving, lights flashing, until at around 2:40, the door to Isabel's room opened and a man entered, his face covered with a mask, wearing a technician's uniform. He walked straight to the machines without hesitation, pressed buttons, disconnected cables, all calmly and confidently. Leonardo paused the video and zoomed in. The mask slipped down a little, just for a second, and that second was enough. It was him, Gustavo. Leonardo's blood boiled, his hands clenched, his jaw tightened. His whole body pounded with rage and disgust. "Damn it," he muttered, his eyes filled with tears. He closed the laptop slowly and looked up at the ceiling, trying not to cry, but the tears came anyway. It was no longer just about saving a patient. It was about justice, about a girl that everyone wanted to silence, and that he now swore to protect, even if he had to give his life for her. The room was silent again, but it was not the same silence as before. It was a tense, heavy silence, as if the air knew that something terrible was still hidden. Leonardo spent the early hours of the morning awake, sitting next to the bed, his face tired, his eyes red from the night of the sabotage attempt. He hadn't moved from there. He was afraid to blink and lose Isabel. The blue light from the monitor illuminated the girl's face. The constant sound of the machines was the only sign that she was still fighting. Leonardo held the chart, writing nonsense just to deceive his own fear. At around 4 a.m., he heard it, soft and faint, like a wind blowing through the soul. It wasn't just me. He looked up immediately. Isabel called out, almost without a voice. Her lips moved again. The sound came out choppy, scratchy. Others in the pit, too. Leonardo's blood ran cold. Others in the pit, too. He stood up slowly with his heart pounding. This was not a dream. It couldn't be. She was trying to say something, and what she was saying was serious. "In the well," he repeated, trying to confirm. "Isabel. Which well?" But she did not respond. Her body was too weak, and her voice disappeared as if it had been erased in the air. Leonardo stood there, not knowing whether to cry or scream. Her words echoed in his head like a drum. Others, too, in the well. Little by him, he sat down again, ran his hands over his face, trembling, grabbed the pen, and wrote each word in large letters on the paper. It wasn't just me. Others, too, in the well. He looked at the little girl lying there, small and fragile, and felt his heart tighten in a way he had never felt before. "My God," he murmured. "Mom, what did they do to you?" The clock read almost 5 a.m. when he got up. He went to the window and looked at the street. Empty, the sky beginning to lighten, and she understood. She could no longer pretend that she was just a doctor, that her work ended inside that hospital. There were more, and those others she had talked about. Someone had to find them. Leonardo closed his coat, took a deep breath, and looked at her once more. "I'm going to find out what's in that well, little one. I promise you." The sun had not yet risen when the police cars began to drive up the dirt road. The noise of engines broke the silence of the mountains. Leonardo sat in the back seat of the patrol car with his hands clenched on his knees, staring out the window. Every curve in the road reminded him of Isabel's words. It wasn't just me. Others were in the well, too. He couldn't get that out of his head. They arrived in Santa Teresa shortly before dawn. The air was cold and heavy. Clouds covered the treetops, and the fog seemed to hide what the world didn't want to see. When the patrol cars stopped in front of the red cabin, the police got out silently. No one spoke. No one needed to say anything. The place said it all. Leonardo got out slowly. The same landscape, the same smell, the same fear, but now he was not alone. One of the investigators approached him. "Is this it?" Leonardo nodded, his voice barely audible. "Behind the house, there's a well." She had already told him about it. The group surrounded the cabin. The tall grass scraped their legs. The ground was damp. There was the well, covered with old boards and a piece of torn canvas. One of the police officers pulled it carefully. Another shone his flashlight. A strong, unbearable smell came from there. A smell that said more than any words. The investigator looked at Leonardo. "Let's dig." They brought shovels, ropes, flashlights. The sound of the earth moving became heavier and heavier. Time stood still. The clouds lowered. The wind stopped blowing. All that could be heard was the sound of metal hitting the ground. Suddenly, one of the policemen shouted, "There's something here!" Everyone approached. The shovel lifted a small piece of colorful fabric. It was a little child's dress, almost destroyed by the earth and time. Leonardo covered his mouth with his hand. A second later, another discovery. A tiny sandal, and then small, large, fragile bones. One of the men dropped his tool and walked away, unable to continue. No one could speak. The sound of the wind returned, and with it a silence that hurt to the bone. Leonardo knelt at the edge of the pit and looked inside. Tears fell without him realizing it. They were girls, he whispered. All of them, and the skeleton of an adult woman. The commander approached and put his hand on his shoulder. "Doctor, you did the right thing." But Leonardo didn't respond. He stared at the ground as if he could ask for forgiveness, as if he could promise that no one else would be forgotten there. The news spread in a few hours. Cameras, reporters, helicopters. The whole country watched in horror as they saw images of what they found in that place. Children's clothes, toys, bones, small lives torn away in silence, hidden in a well that held the worst side of human nature, humanity. The headlines screamed, "Monster of Santa Teresa," the case that shook Mexico. But for Leonardo, it wasn't a headline. It was real. It was the echo of voices that no one wanted to hear. Standing in front of the well, he looked up at the gray sky and thought of Isabel. She survived. She spoke out, and thanks to her, the others had finally been heard. The wind blew strongly, carrying away the smell of the earth. And for the first time, that place seemed to breathe a sigh of relief because the truth, although late, had finally come to light. The news spread like wildfire when the first bones were found in the well behind the cabin. The police took action. Helicopters, patrols, cameras. The truth could no longer be buried. The horror was coming to light, and now, no one could pretend they hadn't seen it. Leonardo was at the hospital when the phone rang. It was the inspector in charge of the investigation. His voice was firm and direct. He escaped. Disappeared last night before we delivered the warrant. Leonardo closed his eyes and squeezed the phone so hard that his fingers hurt. Rage rose like fire in his chest. But fear also came. Fear that Gustavo would go looking for Isabel. Fear that the monster on the loose would try to finish what he started. The next few hours were a mixture of hope and terror. The police distributed portraits, closed roads, and monitored airports. Leonardo did not left the hospital. He slept in the next room, afraid to even blink, until late the next afternoon, when a police officer burst into the break room. Leonardo jumped up immediately, his heart racing. "We caught him!" The words fell like a weight. For a second, Leonardo didn't know what to feel. He wanted to scream, run, cry, but he just nodded, kept his emotions deep inside his chest, and asked, "I want to see him. Are you sure?" Yes. Hours later, he was already there in front of the police station. He went in, passing through narrow corridors and heavy doors until he reached the cell. There he was, sitting on the concrete bench with his hands cuffed and his shirt dirty with mud. Gustavo Reyes slowly raised his eyes when he saw Leonardo and smiled a cold, empty, sick smile. "You don't understand anything," he said in a drawling voice. "She was mine." Leonardo froze. That was just cruelty. It was madness. A sick conviction. You didn't save her. You took what was mine. Leonardo's blood boiled. He took a step forward, his fists clenched, his eyes burning. For a moment, everything went dark inside. The rage, the hatred, the pain. He wanted to scream. He wanted to wipe that smile off his face. But he took a deep breath and felt the weight of his robe. He remembered Isabel, her fragile little face, her whispered words, the struggle she fought every day. And then he understood. Gustavo was imprisoned. Evil had a name, it had a face, but it no longer had power. Leonardo turned slowly and left without saying anything else because now, for the first time in months, he knew Isabel was safe, and this time, no one else was going to silence her voice. The room was silent, but now, it was a different silence. It wasn't the same heavy silence as before, full of fear. It was a light silence, a silence that awaited a breathing silence. Leonardo stood next to the bed with his hands resting on the railing, looking at Isabel, small and pale, still connected to the tubes, but alive, so alive. The latest tests showed signs of her lungs reacting, her heart growing stronger, a slight movement in her eyelids and fingers. The doctors were cautious, saying they had to wait and observe a little longer, but Leonardo felt it deep inside him. He knew she was ready. He called one of his colleagues and explained his decision. At first they hesitated, saying it was too soon, that it was risky, that she couldn't breathe on her own. Leonardo looked him in the eye and replied, Then I'll sit by her side and hold her hand, as I always have." They gave him permission. The team gathered and prepared the room. Leonardo calmly washed his hands and put on his apron. He could feel his heart beating fast, but strong. For the first time, he wasn't afraid. The clock read 11:20 a.m. when he took the first step with great care. He released the oxygen tube, and the sound of the respirator slowed until it stopped. The monitor shook for 2 seconds, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then came the first weak sigh from her, followed by another and another. Air entered Isabel's small lungs, without the help of a machine, without tubes, without anything, just her breathing on her own. The nurse's eyes widened in surprise, opened in surprise. One of them covered her mouth. Another looked at Leonardo without understanding. "She's breathing," someone whispered. Leonardo didn't answer. His eyes were too full of tears for that. His lips trembled. He just looked at her and smiled. He removed the cables. One by one, the monitors turned off. They took away the oxygen machine. Only she remained. The bed, the sheet, and life. That afternoon he sat there in silence. The same silence as always. But now it was a silence that said everything. And then, suddenly, a shadow in the corner of his eye turned Isabel's eyes open, still heavy, but open, blinking slowly, as if returning from a faraway place. She looked around, then stopped on him, and asked in a voice so soft it was almost lost in the air, "Are you an angel?" Leonardo leaned over and smiled with his eyes full of tears. He didn't say anything, just, "I'm someone who believed in you." She slowly raised her little hand and touched his fingers as if to say, "I know." And in that touch was all the pain, the fear, the struggle, but also the relief, the hope, and the life that was slowly returning to the one who should never have been forgotten. Leonardo rested his forehead on hers. They remained like that in silence, and for a moment, the world was at peace. The days that followed were slow, almost at a standstill, but for the first time in a long time, that was good, because every small advance Isabel made was a victory. A sigh, a blink, a movement of her fingers. Everything had a different meaning. Leonardo watched her patiently, sitting next to the bed with the same notebook in his hands. Only now he wasn't writing down vital signs. He was writing words, trying to understand her gestures, to read her looks, to teach her syllables. They were starting from scratch. She no longer knew how to swallow properly or how to say things. The trauma was deep, but her will to live was stronger. The first time she held the spoon by herself, she spilled everything, but she smiled, and he laughed with her. The second time, she managed to bring it to her mouth. Her hand was shaking, but she did it, and he applauded with tears in his eyes. The nights were still difficult. Nightmares came, and she would scream in the middle of the night. The early hours of the morning, but Leonardo was always there. He would sit on the edge of the bed, stroke her hair, and say, "It's okay. It was just a dream. I'm here." She believed him, not because he said so, but because he never left her side. The hospital became an extension of the home she never had. The doctors and nurses all began to call her our little miracle, but she didn't like the noise. She was shy and reserved, looking at everything carefully as if she were still testing the world, still learning that no one else was going to hurt her now. Over time, Leonardo began filling out paperwork. He spoke with social workers, psychologists, and judges. He wanted to know how it worked, how he could legally ensure that she would never return anywhere else but to his arms. It wasn't quick, but every time someone asked, "Doctor, are you sure you want to take care of this?" he would respond, "She's with me. I've never felt so accompanied in life." And he meant it because despite the exhaustion of work and sleepless nights, he discovered something he had never felt before, what it is like to care for someone as if they were your own flesh and blood. One day, the judge finally set the hearing date. It was a simple room in a small office. Leonardo went wearing the white shirt he almost never wore. He sat down in front of the desk and waited. The judge read the document slowly, looked him in the eye, and said with a firm voice, "Dr. Leonardo Barragan, as of today, with the declaration of the mother's death by the girl's father, who is imprisoned for many crimes, You are the legal guardian of the minor Isabel Reyes. Congratulations. She is now officially in your care." Leonardo said nothing. He just closed his eyes and cried. He cried with relief, with gratitude, and also with fear, because he knew what a responsibility it was. But above all, he cried because for the first time, he felt he had a home, and that home was her. Isabel, still recovering, did not fully understand what that paper he signed with trembling hands meant. But when he returned to the hospital that night, he knelt beside her bed and said, "Now it's official. I'm yours." She smiled, stretched out her little hand, and touched his face. "You already were," she whispered. And there, in that cold room that had once been a place of death, a new family was born, made of pain, faith, hope, and a love that only those who have almost lost everything can give. The school uniform was folded on the bed, along with the new backpack that still smelled of plastic. Everything was simple, but for Isabel, it was like entering a new world, a world she never had. Leonardo watched her from a distance without rushing her. She put on her blouse slowly, her movements still timid, as if she were afraid of making a mistake even in that. When she finished, she stood still, looking at the floor. "You look pretty," he said with a slight smile. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "What if they don't like me?" Leonardo bent down to her level. "You just have to be yourself, and I'll be there." She nodded slowly, then held out her hand. "Don't let go." He squeezed her hand tightly. Never on the way to school. She remained silent in the car, looking out the window and biting her lips. Her lips. When they arrived, she didn't want to get out right away. She stood at the door with her fingers intertwined with his. The playground was colorful, full of children running and laughing. But for Isabel, it was all too much, as if she didn't belong there, as if she were an intruder in a place where everyone knew how to play, talk loudly, and fit in. Leonardo walked with her to the classroom door. He felt her little hand squeeze tighter. "It's only until lunchtime," he said. "I'll be right here, and if you want to leave, we'll go." She felt scared, but brave. The teacher welcomed her warmly and showed her desk, her notebook, and her colored pencils. Isabel went in, took 3 steps, then stopped and looked back. Leonardo was still there. She smiled a little and sat down. That morning, he stayed in the car with his cell phone in his hand, unable to do anything but wait, counting the minutes like a real dad, like someone who loves. When she came out at the end of class, she ran to him and smiled genuinely. "They have crayons of all colors." Leonardo bent down and hugged her. "And you have courage of all kinds." But that same night, peace turned to shadow again. It was almost 2 in the morning when he heard the scream, a loud, desperate sound coming from her room. He ran and threw open the door. Isabel was sitting on the bed, her eyes wide open, her face covered in sweat and tears. "He's here!" she screamed. "He's here!" Leonardo ran to her, pulled her into his chest, and hugged her tightly. "Shh, no, my girl. No, he'll never touch you again. Never again, I swear it. For everything, Isabel." She was trembling, her fingers clutching his shirt, her whole body shaking with fear. "I'm here. I'm here. Yes, now you're safe with me. Only with me," she cried. She cried so much that she sobbed with her eyes tightly shut as if she wanted to erase everything. Leonardo stayed there sitting on the bed with her in his arms, stroking her back slowly, breathing with her, saying nothing. Sometimes you can't erase the pain, but you can hold on tight and not let go. That night he didn't sleep, but Isabel, after a while, fell asleep on his chest, like someone who knows that for the first time she has a place to hide and someone to protect her. The morning began with the smell of cake in the air and a simple table decorated with colored paper. There were no expensive balloons, no rented hall, no many guests, but there, in that small house with light curtains and a sun-filled patio, there was something Isabel had never had before. Security, peace, love. It was her first birthday since she left the hospital. Her first with freedom, with a real life. Leonardo woke up early and calmly prepared everything. He poured juice into a jug, cut fruit, set up a small table with flowers, and invited 2 neighbors, the school teachers, and Marina, the nurse who had helped save her life. Few people, but all important. Isabel appeared in the living room wearing a little flowered dress she had chosen herself, her hair tied back with colorful barrettes, and in her eyes that sparkle he already knew. But now it was a different kind of sparkle, lighter, less frightened. She was carrying something in her hands, wrapped in a folded piece of paper with a red ribbon. Leonardo looked at her and smiled. She ran towards him. "Happy birthday, my love," he said, kneeling down. She laughed and handed him the gift. "It's for you." Leonardo frowned in surprise. "For me? You gave me everything. I just wanted to give you something in return." He carefully unwrapped the paper. It was a simple drawing made with colored pencils. In the center were two figures holding hands, a girl in a pink dress and a man in a white coat. Both were smiling with the sun above them and a little house in the background. But what made the world stop was what was written in the bottom corner: "My dearest Dad." Leonardo couldn't say anything. He looked at her, looked at the drawing, and there in the middle of the room, lit by the morning sun, he simply collapsed. He cried on his knees with the drawing against his chest, as if it were the most valuable object in the world, and it was. Isabel approached him and hugged him from behind. They stood there in silence. "You saved me," she whispered. He turned around and held her face in his hands. "You were the one who saved me." At that moment there was no more pain, no more fear, no more past, just the two of them, father and daughter, born in each other's hearts. And that birthday was the most beautiful one anyone there had ever experienced. The auditorium was full of people in white coats, medical students, professors, volunteers. They were all there to listen to a retired doctor with gray hair and slow steps climb onto the stage and tell a story. Many knew that he had experienced something powerful, but no one there could imagine the real weight of what was to come. Leonardo climbed calmly onto the stage with a folded sheet of paper in his pocket and an old badge hanging around his neck, a symbol of decades of work. He took a deep breath in front of the microphone, looked out at the audience and began. "I spent my life in hospitals, seeing people arrive and people leave. I saw a lot of pain, a lot of courage too, and for a long time I believed I understood everything necessary to save a life." He paused. The silence was total. But one day I was about to turn off a little girl's life. The murmur in the room was slight. Some looked at each other. She was 6 years old and in a coma. No one visited her. No one asked about her. I received the order signed by her father to turn off the machines, to disconnect her, and I went to her bedside with the form in my hand. I looked at her, and at that moment I heard something. I don't know how to explain it. It was a voice, a soft whisper, almost a thought that became sound. Leonardo paused, his eyes already shining, and that paralyzed me, because it was impossible. But I heard it. "No, please, no." Those words stayed with me as if the silence itself were asking me for help. In the audience, some were already wiping their eyes. I returned to her the next day and asked her, "If you're there, squeeze my finger." And she squeezed it, almost imperceptibly, but she squeezed it. She took a deep breath and looked at the ceiling for a moment. I lived for that response. I held her hand every day. I listened to every silence, every tear that fell, even though her eyes were closed. And one day she spoke. She said things that no one wanted to hear, things that saved other lives. Her voice broke, but she continued. "That girl taught me that sometimes the body can sleep, but the soul screams, and that the biggest mistake a doctor can make is to believe that they know everything. Because medicine is not just a scalpel or medicine. It is being there. It is listening. It is loving." Then she took the paper out of her pocket. It was the old, yellowed drawing of two figures holding hands, a girl and a man in a robe, with the words, "My soul, Dad." Today, she is an adult. She studies, dreams, lives, and I retired with the certainty that she saved me more than I saved her. And if I can leave a single lesson for those who are just starting out, it is this. He paused for a long time and lowered his voice. Learn to listen to what no one says, because sometimes silence saves lives. The audience rose to their feet and applauded loudly, but Leonardo did not smile. He just put the drawing back in his pocket, slowly walked off the stage, and felt his heart lighter than ever. And now I ask you, If you saw a child in a coma, lying still, covered in wires, with no one by his side, would you turn off the machines or wait just a little longer? You don't have to answer quickly. Breathe, think, feel, because I learned that sometimes what seems to be the end is really just the darkest moment before the light returns, and that silence of someone does not mean that they have given up. Sometimes silence screams, but no one hears it. Sometimes all a person needs is for you to hold their hand for one more day, just one more, even if you don't know what will happen, even if it seems like it's useless, because in that one more day, a miracle can happen. So comment below, do you believe in miracles? If this story touched your heart, share it. Someone might need to hear it. Someone might be about to let go, not knowing that life is just around the corner. And if you want to see more stories like this, stories that make us feel and remember that there is still love in the world, subscribe to the channel. There are many things that still need to be told, and who knows, maybe the next story will be yours.